This is probably going to be a long audio, video I might put in, so it is a video. In video format, I might go ahead and put up some pictures of me as a child, maybe young adult, which would cover the time frame that I'm going to talk about. And this is about my mother's, I guess you could say abusive. And can you be spiritual and just not like someone? I think so. I've certainly forgiven her for all the things she's done, but do I have to like her? No. I think that's spiritual bypassing, really. If you say, well, if you truly have forgiven someone, you should love them and like them. I don't believe that you need to do that. So I'm just going to talk about maybe the highlights or the lowlights of my life, the memories that I remember most vividly of Mother Dearest. When I was 10 years old, my mom and I and Grandma, we moved to Arizona, and we had to move in with my grandma for a while. In fact, I think that was the plan. We were all three going to live together. But my grandma was very verbally abusive. She liked to call me her good-for-nothing. I wasn't worth anything, and she had her own traumas. That's why she became the way she did. And of course now, like I said in my past video, my dog is, if you hear crinkles, she's playing with a toy. So pardon that. I try to play with her with this when I'm not recording, and she's like, eh. And now when I'm recording, then she's going to play with it. So whatever. Anyway, I would complain to my mom, saying, Grandma's being really mean to me. And there for a while, my mother would just say, oh, she's just trying to get back at me, so it's not you. Well, when you're 10 years old, that, and even if you were an adult, you're still getting, verbally abused. That doesn't, but especially as a child, that excuse, that doesn't help, when you're faced with a bully. And then after a while, my mom would just say, because I would complain almost every day, and she finally would just say, shut up, don't rock the boat, just shut up. And that was her way of dealing with it. So I just didn't want to live anymore. And I remember going into my closet in my bedroom, had my door shut, and I would do this like a lot. I would try to will myself to die because I didn't want to live anymore. But, 10 years old, I didn't really contemplate actually going through with killing myself. I just wanted it all to end. Well, one day my mom saw me in the closet. She came in and she wanted to know what I was doing, and I told her, and she just was, instead of being compassionate, which I really didn't know how she would react, it was just like, well, you asked, and this is what I'm doing. She got really mad. And in fact, decades later, she would call me manipulative just because of that one incident when I was 10 years old trying to die. And when a child wants to die, especially way before the teen years, that, hormones and everything, you still should take seriously when anyone, but especially a child wants to die, you should take that seriously. And it wasn't like, oh, you didn't buy me this, so I'm gonna die. I don't want to live anymore. There was never a pattern like that. And then in the 90s, when I was engaged to someone who was my son, I had a son at the time. He was 5, 6. I mean, I still have a son, but at the time he was 5 or 6 years old. And it was a verbally abusive relationship. We lived with him for a while. And I was thinking, yeah, I probably should leave. But then 6 years old, my son said, I don't want to live anymore. And that was it. That was finally the decision that I knew, okay, I've got to get him out of this situation. I didn't react in anger. I have never, in 30 years later, I've never, brought that up to my son saying, look at what you did. You manipulated me. No. I mean, that's a child. A child, it's not normal for a child to want to die. It just simply is not. So anyway, fast forward a few years, I was 14 and we went to a Christmas party at her boss's house. And her boss had, I think, 3 guys renting rooms at her house. They were ASU students, or I don't know why, I think helicopter. So maybe they were at helicopter school or something. But they were 20 years old. I was 14. One of them took a shine to me. And my mother was right there. Here's this man coming on to her child. He's slow dancing with me, grinding himself on me, and I'm just kept looking at my mom for help. And I was raised to be a pleaser. And I was also certainly raised to not question my intuition, not question my inner voice that's saying, hey, this is wrong, because I questioned that over how my grandmother treated me. And my mother would say, oh, she loves you in her own way. Or how my father was. And I guess I'll post in this description how he was with me. But she would say, oh, he loves you in his own way. So I was taught that love is certainly doesn't have the best interests, certainly doesn't treat me kindly. And then he got out this mistletoe, this guy, this 20-year-old man, and I just thought, okay, just a little peck on the cheek. No, it was far more than that. But my mother was okay with a grown man open mouth kissing her child. And it's just like, wow. Now, see, 14 years old, I don't care what right-wing pundits say, 14-year-old girl is not ready for a man. And I was kind of, I don't know, I was very mature for my age. And I had been reading Judith Krantz novels, so I knew a lot. And I had this active fantasy life. But when it came to reality, when a man was coming on to me, that was terrifying. So after a while, he pulls me into his bedroom. My mother never went after me to see what was going on. Nothing. And I tried to get away from him. And the next day, I still had bruises on my wrists, both wrists, where he was holding me and didn't want me to leave. But thankfully, he was so drunk that he passed out and I was able to escape. But she did not care that a grown man was trying to force himself on her child. Now, 10 years later, I'm living in an apartment. I get a phone call at 3 o'clock in the morning. She's sobbing, saying, I see, and I'm not going to say his name, but my then boyfriend at the time, I see his car in your parking lot. And this is like a big apartment complex parking lot. So she had to go around and look to see if his car was there, and apparently decided to go out at 3 o'clock in the morning to see if his car was there, so that, oh my gosh, he must be spending the night. So she's just crying. I was like, really? You were okay with a man trying to force himself on me when I was a child, but you're not okay with me being 24 years old and having my own life? What? Anyway, so I did end up eventually marrying that boyfriend. He was, I don't know, certainly had signs of paranoid schizophrenia. The last, several months before we finally separated, he would come home and describe ways in which he would see me and sometimes our son violently dying. And he would always hear voices in his head and whatever. But he was abusive. And my mother would say, oh, that the day you said I do, I knew that was your death sentence. So she knew that he was dangerous. Finally, I got the courage to leave him. The church certainly didn't help, you know. Oh, that's another thing. I'll have to do a video on that, how the conservative Christians reacted to domestic violence and wives must submit and all that stuff. But anyway, so finally, this husband, my husband at the time, he said that he was going to change, because he'd always say that and never did, and he was going to enlist in the military. So my mom said, hey, go along with that. Encourage him to do that, because once he's in the military, then you'll get child support, you'll get health insurance, you'll know where he is, he'll be, farther away, so you don't have to worry about him anymore. And I kind of I did go along with it. I didn't like to, because then it's like I've got to sit there and lie to him, but it's like, okay, out of self-preservation and to save my life and my son's life, okay, I'll do that. Well, then we had to move in, my son and I had to move in with her for a while. And that was difficult before he went into the military. Because I don't know. I guess it's because, you can only go in at certain times when they would have training. So I can't remember how long we had to wait until he went in. He got signed, sealed, and delivered to his boot camp or whatever it's called. But anyway, my son and I had to move in with my mother for a little while, and she actually owed me money. Had she paid the money that she owed me, then we could have gotten our own apartment, but she did not. Although when I did finally get my own apartment, she did put a van on her credit card. She got a cash advance, so clearly she could have paid the money that she owed me, but she didn't. Anyway, we had to move in with her for a while. She had 2 big dogs. They're Borzois, Russian wolfhounds. They're very tall, slight of build, but tall. And my son at the time was 15 months old, and of course they wanted to play with him. They weren't being mean or anything. They just, wow, this is we're taller than this little thing, This is a small human. So they would, kind of paw at him and stuff. And it's like I would tell him no, because, you should tell a dog no when they're doing something they shouldn't be doing. And my mother would get mad at me for telling them no. And she didn't like that. And she didn't like that she had to put them outside or in her bedroom or something whenever my son and I were there. I tried to stay away as much as possible because she's just unpleasant anyway, but I knew that, her poor dogs having to be put away or to be, chastised by me telling no. So she didn't like that arrangement, and she wanted to hurry up and get me to move out. So instead of paying me the money she owed, like I said, she told my then husband at the time, whom she knew was very, very dangerous to me and to my son. Well, it's our son, but I consider him my son. My mother decided to tell my then husband, dangerous husband, that I was just pretending to be going back with him and that I did not have the intention, once he finished his military training, to get back with him. Now, luckily, my then husband knew that my mother lied a lot, so I just kind of played it off as, yeah, she's just lying, she's trying to cause trouble. But to say that to a man who saw repeated visions of me and my son dying violent ways, she knew that he heard voices in his head. She knew that he was dangerous. For her to tell him that I was lying to him, that put my son's life and my life in danger. So I view it as her, in a passive-aggressive way, trying to get me killed. So anyway, several years later, I did, I divorced him. I moved far away from where we were at the time. And it always kind of in the back of my head, wondering if I didn't pay her enough attention, that she would tell my ex where I was. That was always in the back of my head. And one time when we were living in Detroit, my son and I, and there was something to do with, I don't know what it was, but there was something to do with the phone service, and we were out of phone service for a while, so I don't know what happened with that, but it was like 3-4 weeks that somehow a large portion of Detroit was out of phone service. So I wrote to her. I think this was before email, or email was just getting started, but I didn't really email her because why? So I couldn't call her once a week like she liked, and kiss her ass and all that stuff. So, but I had written to her telling her about what was going on with the phone service. I had no phone service anymore, and many of us did not. So she wasn't getting the attention that she thought she deserved. So she wrote me a letter saying that she thought she saw my ex-husband hanging around her mailbox, probably trying to find a letter from me to see what the postmark was or something. Well, I was still going through PTSD at the time. She knew right away, as soon as I got that letter, that I would call her. I called her at work. So apparently she thought I should be calling her at work once a week. I don't know. So I called her, and I was just upset. I'm just shaking and PTSD. And she said, "Oh, I think I made a mistake." Yeah, that's how she dealt with it. She didn't care that she re-traumatized me. She just wanted her attention. So after a while, several years, I got tired of all her BS. And I didn't call her once a week. I didn't answer her emails right away within 24 hours like I was supposed to. So she decided, because she likes to catastrophize things. She's a drama queen. So she told our whole family that I and my son must be dead on the side of the road because she hasn't heard from me in like a couple weeks or something like that. So then, of course, that made them all of a sudden, email me, which, my family's just crap anyway. It wasn't like they kept in touch with me. So they all, emailed, what's wrong? Are you okay? And then one of them said, you probably should just email your mom and tell her you're okay. So I did, and I said in the email, why, or maybe this was a phone conversation, I said, why would you go around telling people that you think I'm dead and my son's dead? Why couldn't you never once called me to check to see if I was okay? Why didn't you call me before, assuming I was dead? Why didn't you call me? And she said, I didn't want to bother you. What? She didn't want to bother me, so then she made up this fantasy that I was dead? I mean, what? I still, to this day, I can't find the right descriptive word for that. I mean, drama queen, yeah, but it's just, what is that? What is that? That you would act like that? I don't, and this is how my mother is. So, with all that said, about, I think, a year or two later, my son and I moved to New York, and I decided that I was not going to tell my mother where I was moving to or give her my address, give her my phone number. I wasn't going to give her any of that. And so I wrote her a letter, and as we were driving the U-Haul away, I popped the letter into the mailbox, and it basically said all this stuff about, how she told my then husband about I was pretending to get back with him so that he would go into the military. I told her about how she over-dramatized this when she couldn't get in touch, where she refused to get in touch with me, but she hadn't heard from me for a while, so apparently I'm dead. So I said, with that said, I really don't trust you to not share my information with my ex. You're just not trustworthy. Well, my goodness. She still had my email address, but she never contacted me that way. She called my ex-fiance, not the ex-husband, but the ex-fiance, when I was living in Detroit. She called him, and he's an attorney. She called him to say, saying, oh, Tracy's not going to tell me where she is, so I don't know where my grandson is, so I'm going to file a missing persons claim. And my I'll call him John, the attorney, the ex-fiance, said, well, I know where he is, and Tracy knows where he is, so he's not a missing person. So then, I don't know if it was in the same conversation or she called up later after she thought of other things. Then she said, well, clearly Tracy is mentally ill, that she no longer wants to have contact with me. So how do I go about getting her committed? And John said, well, I've had contact with her, and I can assure you she is very mentally fit. She's not mentally ill at all. And then her third and final trying to get me in trouble was, well, I think I'm going to contact the police and get her arrested because she left the state of Florida, and she, in her divorce decree, she's not supposed to leave the state. Now, with that, John didn't know. He didn't know that. So then he referred me told me to contact my divorce attorney. So I did. And it was luckily perfect timing, because it had been, 10 years. And she said she was just getting out her old files, and she was going to start throwing them away because it had been so long. So she was able to refresh herself on my case, and she said, no, you have sole legal full custody. You can leave the state, you can leave the country if you want. So, how my mother dealt with me no longer wanting to have anything to do with her was trying to get me arrested, trying to get me committed. Now, if my son were to come to me and say, hey, I have these issues with you and I don't want to have any contact with you, then I would say, well, I'm sad about that. And if we can talk about it, I would love to talk to you about it. But, you know where I live, you know my phone number, you know my email. Contact me whenever you want to talk. So I think that's what a normal parent would do. So I don't know what her problem is. Obviously, she has a lot of problems. This is just how she is. We did reestablish contact after 15 years, a few years ago, but she's not changed. Not at all. She plays her mind games all the time. And now I'm back to, I just told her I was having problems with my phone, so we'll just email. Because I just don't want to talk to her. Now, I have forgiven her. Obviously, I have compassion for someone to be like that. They have to have, a deep trauma or deep darkness or deep whatever inside them to make them be that way, especially to your child whom you are supposed to, it's kind of instinctual to want to love and nurture your child. She doesn't have that. So I don't know. I don't know what's wrong with her, and I don't care because it's not my business. Now, spiritually, yeah, like I said, I can have compassion for her. I can forgive her. But do I have to like her? No, I don't. Do I have to love her? That's the tricky part. I can look at it in an impersonal way of loving her, just like I love all of creation, because all of creation is from the divine, infinite creator source, which is of love. So I can, look at it in a way of saying, okay, she has the divine spark within her. And the divine wanted to figure out what it's like to be inside a personality that is unlovable, that hurts people. And so that is the divine finding out what it's like. Of course, the divine is within me, so now it feels what it's like to be a victim. So I can love that part of her. But it doesn't mean I have to want to be around her. And then it's just also karma, too. She certainly has been one of my greatest teachers of forgiveness and strength. Certainly learning strength and resilience. And I remember a past life where I was burned at the stake as a witch. And I remember looking out through the smoke and seeing a woman gloating, just very self-righteous, as Jerry Falwell, Christian fundamentalists, can look, just very self-righteous. And that woman at the time was my accuser. She was my mother in that lifetime, and she is my mother now. So yeah, in that lifetime, she got me killed. In this lifetime, she tried to get me killed. Through my ex-husband. So maybe I had some carryover. Maybe I did not forgive her. After I was burned alive, burned to death, maybe my soul was still harboring some resentment. And so I had to learn to forgive her in this life, which I know I have. But And I've wrestled with that because it's like, okay, I don't like this person. So does that mean I've fully forgiven her? And yeah, I do believe that you can fully forgive someone and not want to have anything to do with them. And it must, that saying, oh, it sucks to be you. But it really must suck to be her, because she is devoid of any friends. She constantly badmouths. I've grown up with this. She doesn't have anything good to say about her family, any family member, or any of her so-called friends. She's always bad-mouthing every single friend she has ever had. And I've had to grow up with that. she has one friend now, but yet not really, because this one friend is a conservative Christian too. And my mother likes to gloat over how her cousins are going to hell because going to burn in hell because they don't believe the way she does, and all these other people don't believe the way she does, so they're all going to hell. So, but she has this one so-called friend who's Christian. But my mother likes to say, but she's not a real Christian, because her friend has a daughter who is lesbian and got married to a woman. And my mother was just like so aghast that her friend would actually go to her daughter's wedding, because no good Christian would do that. So apparently she's not a real Christian like my mother is. So, yeah. So like I said, she doesn't really have any friends. And the ones that she considers friends, she badmouths all the time. So that would be a very lonely way of living. To not have anyone to like. Now she plays really good at, she's dumb like a fox, and she plays really good at, oh, poor me. You know, she likes to, what was it, last year? She got a check from the farm income. She's sitting on a check, $42,000 check in the bank. Plus she gets monthly Social Security. So, and she has no house payment. She's already paid for it long time ago. No car, so she has no car expenses. So no house, no car payment, nothing like that. So she should be doing pretty good. And she is, but she's always poor. I don't know what she does with her money, and I don't care. But she bilks people out of money because the ceiling in her garage came down. It was crumbling or something. So she was like, oh, how much is this going to cost? So she had this one handyman that she's used before. She, when he was coming over, she made sure to get into, and she told me all this, she got into her clothes that are all raggedy and have holes in them. And she, kind of acts all, oh, woe is me. So he comes over and he gives her a good price. And I think she said he had a helper. So for the first day, 2 people worked 8 full hours on it. And then, the next day, he came over and worked another full day. And I think he only charged her like $300 or something. That's plus the material. But, he felt sorry for her because she's in raggedy clothes and apparently poor and all that. And here's this guy. He's like in his 70s. He doesn't have enough money yet to retire. And she's doing that to him after she has $42,000 sitting in the bank. And she gets her monthly Social Security. That's the kind of good Christian that she is. So I was just like, oh my word. But this is how she is. So, yeah. The only thing, I don't have any hate towards her or animosity. The overriding feeling is like, this is absurd. How can someone be like this? And still, obviously she's not self-aware. And there are certainly plenty of people around in the world who are like this. And it's like, you just look at them and it's like, how can you be that unself-aware? But we just have to, whenever we have to deal with people like that, even if they're relatives, we just have to look at them and shake our head and just kind of laugh. And it's like, well, that's who they are. And apparently they're not ever going to change. At least my mother, she's in her 80s. She's not ever going to change. And you just have to move on with life. You can't, when you deal with people like this, you just you just have to scratch your head and kind of laugh at the absurdity of it all, and just move on. Don't take anything personally that they say or do towards you. That's just who they are. And you just have to also know that they must be very miserable inside to treat people that way and to see people that way, and to, especially the conservative Christians, to just point out, oh, that person's going to burn in hell for eternity, and that one, and that one, and that one, and it's just amazing. But you don't engage, you don't attach to them in any way. And I think that way, if you can remain neutral, then there is nothing to forgive, really. I mean, yeah, if you have history with them, you have to work on forgiving them. But going forward, once you've forgiven them, there's nothing to forgive, because you don't attach to anything they say or do. You just know that this is how they are. You don't look at, like, say, a noxious weed growing in your garden, or, well, yeah, you would pull the weed, but you don't. But if for some reason it has to stay there, because whatever reason, you don't just look at it and just take offense at it. You just say that is what it is. Or maybe an animal, in the wild, and it's going to attack you. Well, you don't just hurl insults at it, and if you get away, you don't just hold it against them for the rest of your life. The animal is just being an animal, and these people are just being who they are. They can't help it, and no amount of whatever you do for them, no amount of kindness, no amount of trying to reason with them, it may not change them. In fact, it's likely not to change them, because no matter what's on the inside, or what's on the outside, people won't change until they really, really want to, and that comes from the inside. So yeah, can you be spiritual and just not like someone? Yeah, you can. There's nothing wrong with that. To say otherwise, I think, is spiritual bypassing. Like I said, you can have compassion, you can forgive them, you can love the divine within them, no matter how tiny of a spark that is. You can at least love that little spark and their soul, the untouched part of their soul. And then just move on, just be neutral. And if at all possible, try not to have contact with them, or have very limited contact with them, and just don't engage.